Good evening and welcome to the September 10th Board of Douglas County Commissioners 5:30 business meeting. Paper copies of the agenda are available for those here in person, and the full packet is available on our website. Reviewing our agenda, first we'll consider our consent agenda. There are 2 items on that agenda. After our consent agenda, we'll have general public comment. We welcome general public comment for addressing issues not on today's agenda but otherwise related to county business. Given our time and the need to have an orderly and efficient meeting, we apply certain rules regarding public comments. We'll do our best to enforce these rules consistently and without regard to the point of view expressed by the speaker. Here are the rules. 1, each speaker will be limited to a total of 3 minutes of speaking time. However, we'll accept public comment of any length in writing. 2, individual speakers may not donate unused time to other speakers. 3, all comments must address topics within the jurisdiction of the County Commission. And 4, we reserve the right to mute and remove any speaker whose comments are threatening, aggressively hostile, or belligerent. Campaigning for public office during the public comment period is not allowed. Please give your full name and address for our meeting minutes and address your comments to the Commission. Please also know that comments received by the Commission during our meetings do not necessarily represent the views of Douglas County government, but we value the input. We don't usually respond to general public comments on the spot, but if you leave your contact information, the county staff will try and get specific question answered. After that, we'll move to our regular agenda. There's 1 item on our regular agenda tonight, and that is an update on the Douglas County Land Protection Program. For that action item, we'll hear from staff first, followed by questions from the commission, and then open up the item for public comment on that item. Once public comment is closed, we'll bring the item back to the commission for a vote, and this is for information only this evening, so there's no votes, but we may have further discussion. Lastly, a recording of this meeting will be available on the county's YouTube page and website. Commissioners, is there anything on the consent agenda that you'd like to have removed for further discussion? Seeing none, any member of the public like to remove an item from consent agenda? Sarah, anyone online? I would welcome a motion on the consent agenda item, Commissioners.
I move we approve consent agenda items 1.1 and 1.2.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion or comments or questions? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Passes 5-0. We'll move on to general public comment. Is there anyone here at the courthouse who'd like to provide general public comment at this time? Anyone online, Sarah? Okay, we'll close public comment and move to our regular agenda. And we'll start with an update on the Douglas County Land Protection Program. And I see Caitlin moving forward, so I'll kick it to Caitlin.
All righty. Good evening, good afternoon, commissioners. I'm Caitlin Amerlin. I'm the Heritage Conservation Coordinator for Douglas County, and I'm so excited to be joined today by Caitlin Stanley, the Executive Director of the Kansas Land Trust, and together we'll be sharing an update on the Douglas County Land Protection Program. The Land Protection Program is a pilot program that we launched last year, designed to support voluntary conservation agreements and pathways for Douglas County landowners. This program is designed to support the implementation of the open space plan and the criteria set forward in the plan, specifically with a focus on the public benefit of these private lands. It's closer to me so I can see them. And so today we'll just be giving a brief overview of how this project connects to our greater open space work and giving an update on how the work has progressed so far and where we're headed moving forward. It's been a minute, so we last discussed this around this time last year with you all and presented a framework for what could be possible with a partnership with the Kansas Land Trust. And so I'm going to give a bit of a recap context to contextualize this program, and then Caitlin will dive into the specifics of the work that's completed to date. Feel free to pop in with any questions along the way. And then generally our goals here is just, again, to provide that update and make sure we're on the right track moving forward. Alrighty, so the open space plan was adopted last year in April 2024. So this is Douglas County's comprehensive vision for how to think about conservation here in Douglas County. Um, so, like I said, adopted in 2024, but this project really began in earnest in May 2019. You all, the Douglas County Commission, approved the project charter that formally started this process. It took a couple of years to get the planning started, but the project then started in December 2022. When our consultants were identified, we worked with Logan Simpson and Coneflower Consulting to pull this project together. What ensued was then an 18-month planning process that involved a lot of public input, lots of time, lots of work, and that is all detailed in the open space plan itself. So I'd highly encourage, if you haven't already had a chance, or for folks listening in online, to check out the plan itself. It's available on our website and fills in a lot of the gaps. A couple of things I wanted to highlight about how the open space plan came together and thinking about implementation. This is a very collaborative project. So I'm here today and I work in the heritage space and oversee the heritage programs for the county. But it was really a joint collaborative effort among several county departments. So our sustainability, zoning and codes, and public works team all have been super instrumental in putting both the plan together and as we think about implementation. It's very collaborative and I think speaks to the work in general here in Douglas County and how we kind of effectively work together to really maximize the impact, especially of a project like this that does touch so many disciplines and is kind of broad in scope. So I'm speaking today, but there's a lot of other work and folks going on that work on this throughout the county. Also wanted to highlight the funding for this pilot and kind of how that all came together in July 2022. So before the planning process even began in earnest, again, the Douglas County Commission funded or allocated $2.78 million for open space implementation. So knowing that this was something the county was taking on, allocated funding for the purposes of implementing the recommendations from the open space plan. I'll also note that the plan itself was funded also primarily by an external grant that the Sustainability Office applied for and administered. And I think only a small bit of the ARPA allocation went toward the actual planning. And so with that in mind, knowing that we had a pool of funds to pilot programs and make potential investments in open space, we kind of had that in the back of our head through the planning process and were able to, once the plan was adopted, immediately jump in and start brainstorming and strategizing on how to effectively use those dollars here in Douglas County. Again, federal dollars through the ARPA program. And so that led then into November of us formalizing the agreement with the Kansas Land Trust for $250,000 to put together this pilot program that we're talking about. And so jumping back and thinking about the open space plan as a whole, so it sets a very comprehensive vision for what conservation could look like here in Douglas County and what the county's role can be. It outlines 8 conservation criteria that should be prioritized when we think about open space projects, whether that be all sorts of things. And so all those sorts of things are there. It presents tools and a menu of sort of strategies that we can take and suggest some increasingly larger steps that the county could eventually choose to take as we want to build that conservation vision here. But that said, that's kind of the big vision. But we knew that we had these implementation funds available. And with that in mind, we identified 3 core immediate action areas that the county could take an immediate leadership role. And we've let these 3 kind of guide those investments in from that ARPA funding and guide our kind of first steps into understanding how the county can be a player in this conservation space. So I'll kind of jump through those and landing at where we are today. But the first being the current park improvements and enhancements. So this was exemplified beautifully yesterday at a ribbon cutting ceremony for the new kayak launch at Lone Star Lake Park. So there's about $600,000 in future investments being made out there, including that new kayak launch. And so we've shared some more information about that in the past. But that action area is really focused on how can we best support our existing assets in open space and potentially build upon that in the future. That's kind of that path. The second primary focus focus area was conservation planning for the Wakarusa River corridor. This is another active project that we're working on. The Wakarusa Vision Plan is kind of its working name there. And so work has been going on for several months on this, and there'll be some updates soon on some dates and some next steps in that project. So that will be later this fall. But today we're here to talk about this third action area, programmatic support for private land conservation. One of the emerging themes that came from all of our open space outreach was how do we better connect our landowners here in Douglas County to the resources they need to achieve the conservation vision that they have for their land. We found that there was a lot of barriers, particularly financial barriers to accessing some of these permanent conservation options. And so that's where our conversations with the Kansas Land Trust really started. We're lucky that the Kansas Land Trust is based here in Douglas County. And so they've been a wonderful partner and resource for information on this. And so a partnership with them emerged as a great starting place for how we can explore how Douglas County can be a partner in this private land conservation space. Yeah, I think that's most of all that I have here in terms of how we got to where we are. If there are no questions on the kind of build up to here, I'll turn it over to Caitlin for the project updates.
Thank you, Caitlin. And thank you all for your support of land conservation in Douglas County. I'm the executive director of the Kansas Land Trust, and we are a nonprofit organization that's celebrating 35 years of conserving land in Kansas. We worked for the successful passage of the Kansas Uniform Conservation Easement Act in 1992. And then in 1994, we protected our first property here in Douglas County, which is a 16-acre prairie, the Aiken Prairie, that's open to the public. And that protects more than 200 plant species, including the federally threatened Mead's milkweed. Sorry, I forget that I need to advance slides. So today we've protected 82 properties throughout the state and more than 41,000 acres. We do this work through voluntary conservation agreements with private landowners. These easements limit the amount or type of development on the property while the landowner retains private ownership. Is there something? Oh. Is that better? No? Okay. The voluntary conservation agreements limit the amount or type of development on properties while the landowner retains private ownership as well as many other uses of the land. Each agreement is unique to the land and the landowner. And over the course of drafting the agreement with the landowner, the protective restrictions are mutually agreed upon. And these easements are perpetual. So conservation easements are a perpetual protection tool that runs with the land regardless of the landowner changes. Sorry, I think I'm ahead one. We received a lot of interest when we opened up an application. So we worked throughout the county. We had several outreach events targeted on this specific program. We also tabled at partner events to let people know that this was an opportunity. And we disseminated information about the program in our communications, and we got local and national coverage of this partnership. We received 16 inquiries from landowners in Douglas County and 8 eligible applications. In those 8 eligible applications, we identified 3 projects that really rose to the top, all of which have really significant public benefits. I won't read all of the significant public benefits on these slides. They're just to highlight these are all in the plan, the open space plan. And I just wanted to highlight how each of these projects hit significant public benefits. And that was really the primary criteria that we were looking at when we identified of those 8 applications, which 3 projects we were going to select. So the first one is a watershed and recreation forest. This project is really unique. It comprises 5 landowners, and this has a typo on it. Sorry, they have 400 acres, but 270 acres of those are oak hickory forest. And there's 1.34 miles of stream bank that will be protected in this property as well. This is in southwest Douglas County, and you'll notice that I'm being intentionally vague about the location, the exact location, and I'm not naming landowners. We really try to respect the privacy of landowners in our work, especially until an easement is complete. And so during this process, we're not going to publicize any of that information. These landowners all share a vision for a conservation corridor that provides a much needed public access in this part of Douglas County. There will be hiking trails and low impact tent sites on a portion of the property. And the remainder of the property will be open to, is my microphone being really weird or is it just me? Step back, okay. The remainder of the property will be open for research and educational purposes.
I have a question about that. So with it being private property, how does that get, solidified or maintained? Is it, I mean, can those landowners then change their minds, or is it just written into the conservation agreement? Is that how that works? The public access part?
The public access is written into the conservation agreement.
And then how does that information get to the public? Is it?
So it will be a public recreation space. And so we're working out a lot of the details on ownership. But this is an exciting project because we've identified some partners that are interested in potentially owning the land. The Kansas Forest Service is working with us on an application for a forest legacy program that would allow for a public entity to own the land and for the recreational trails and campsites to be owned by an entity that's eligible under that program. That's still the beginning phases. I think this Project One is really exciting in that we're attracting other partners to this vision. And so we've definitely leveraged the county funds to bring in other partners. But that part is just in its infancy with the Forest Legacy Program. We're submitting with the Kansas Forest Service to that. But the vision of the landowners is to have recreation trails and tent sites. And so we'll work with them to help accomplish that vision. And then we'll just see who the successive landowner is in that vision. But it could also be in their lifetime, depending on how they want to work on that.
I have a quick question about this one. It's really just curiosity. I love the idea that it's multiple landowners working together. Is that something that Kansas Land Trust has seen before? Like, is that somewhat typical, or are you often working with single landowners only?
This is pretty unique. We have a couple of examples of multiple landowners, but this is a fairly unique project, and we're really excited about the ideas of neighbors working together on a conservation corridor. This accomplishes a lot of our goals for conservation.
Yeah, I think that's cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
What is a low impact tent site?
So it would be tents only, and no electric hookup or anything like that. So no RVs.
So would it be similar to what we have out at like Lone Star or Clinton, and individuals would like rent like a location and they would pay a fee?
Yeah, probably. And I will say, like, again, this part is really in its infancy, the planning for how it becomes a public recreation space. But it's something that the protective measures will permit. And so it can evolve over time, but the protection of the place is the most important, and that will have the provisions that allow for it to be a public recreation space through time.
Thank you.
Yeah. The next project that rose to the top is a conservation area near Clinton Lake. This involves a landowner who has long had interest in protecting their land and did not have the resources to be able to do so. So this partnership has been really important for them to be able to make their dream of protecting a high quality remnant prairie adjacent to other protected lands. There's KLT protected lands and Clinton Lake nearby. And so making that vision of protecting this connective area a reality. And so this is a really exciting project for us. The landowner, upon their death, will transfer ownership of their property to a conservation aligned entity to allow research, education, and low impact public recreation. Again, this property is adjacent to other protected lands, and so it will be a necessary connector for wildlife habitat and may serve as a future recreational trail to enhance future and forthcoming residential development in that area. The third project that we're working on in this pilot program is to assess the feasibility of protecting urban agricultural land that may provide opportunities for new and beginning farmers. We received an application that was really appealing to us, and this is a new area for the Kansas Land Trust to work in, urban farm protection. And so we're doing a lot of research and learning to identify the best protection pathway for this property. This specific property definitely aligns with a lot of other plans in the community as well, the Climate Action Plan, Food System Plan, and then the Kansas Land Trust Strategic Conservation Plan. So that's what we've done. And the next steps are that we continue our due diligence, which is the most of the work that goes into a conservation easement. So we're continuing with appraisals, title work, environmental site assessments, baseline documentation reports, securing additional funding as needed with the corridor down in Southwest Douglas County. That will be a much larger project that we'll need to secure additional funding for. And then we'll continue on with our due diligence for the other two and try to work with partners that may be necessary to come to the table for an urban farm protection project. That's where we're at right now.
Can I have a question about the urban agriculture one?
Yeah, absolutely.
So is that land that's currently serving a function as urban agriculture
Yes,
or has potential for?
both. It
Okay.
is, and the hope is that it will continue to.
And would there be additional lands that would be part of that urban agriculture, or is it like everything's already kind of in production and that's the hope is to keep it that way?
Yes.
Thanks.
Do you want to clarify just with that particular project, whether that's a conservation easement or is that being pursued as another?
Yeah. So I don't know if you noticed, but I was saying we're pursuing the appropriate pathway for that because a conservation easement may not be the appropriate pathway. So it is new for us to get into this area, and we're trying to assess if that is what's best for this property and for the community to have a conservation easement on that land, or if there's another protective measure that can ensure that that land is an urban farm that supports new and beginning farmers. So this is a project that we definitely are, it's new to us, we're researching it, and we're trying to identify the best pathway. But it was very exciting to us to see an application of this sort, and so we definitely want to work toward conserving it.
Can you talk a little bit about why a conservation easement might not be a good route for that?
The location and surrounding lands, we just have very strict criteria for environmental hazards. And so with a conservation easement, that might not be the best tool that will not have conflict with adjacent uses of land. And so we just need to be really strategic. We want to make sure that a conservation easement enhances the community and doesn't create any barriers to other necessary activities in the community.
And I know you don't want to reveal the location. Is it within the urban growth area?
Yes.
Okay.
I have some follow-up questions also. So the urban agriculture one especially, but kind of all of these have programmatic needs that go with it. So whether that's, figuring out who does the public access part and the camping part, and then this, like the beginning farmer training, is that doesn't seem like that's within the scope typically of Kansas Land Trust or of our open space plan. So how do those pieces get filled out?
Yeah. So again, our goals are to protect the land and have a mutual agreement with the landowner of the uses that are permitted and are not. And so in doing that, we're creating a framework that the land can be used for those purposes through time. And so it is highly likely that with all of these, the end goal will not be realized by the time that this grant is done. I mean, that's just not practical, but the conservation easement will protect the land for the uses identified with the landowner. And then those other pieces are the landowner and us as a conservation partner working with them to identify those resources, partners, and funding mechanisms to make those goals reality. And hopefully Douglas County open spaces as well.
I'll just pop in and just really highlight that point that the conservation easement and these protection pathways that might be possible in partnership with the Kansas Land Trust is really the first step. Sort of that protection element comes first, and then it's okay. How do we realize the vision? And like Caitlin said, the easement really provides the framework for what that could look like for the land, and then all the next steps kind of continue. The Kansas Land Trust does a really good job in collaborating and collecting those partners and kind of being that hub. While they don't do it themselves, they could be a really valuable partner in bringing folks to the table. I think that's really exemplified by the first project and leveraging the support of the Kansas Forest Service and tapping into those federal Forest Legacy Program dollars. I think that is a wonderful project to kind of exemplify, how do we get the right folks at the table? Because that's kind of challenging to do here in Kansas. We're kind of missing a couple of key partners in that space that might be present in other states. And so we kind of are learning and are excited to learn how to pull those partners to the table here. And so anyway, but the easement and the goals of this program to support the development of that protection of the land, that's the first step. And then all the rest kind of falls into all the kind of questions and that kind of came from the open space plan itself. And so that's work that still needs to be done, but we at least have folks at the table and the protection is kind of the first step there.
And I will say, we do have a few properties that are open to the public. I mentioned Aiken Prairie as our first protected property, and that's really low impact public recreation. There can be trails mowed, just really low maintenance for a landowner to be able to do that on their own and permit public access. So in some cases, it doesn't require a lot of partners coming together. It just requires a dedicated landowner that wants to continue to permit public access on their land. So
Any other questions, commissioners? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll open it up for public comment. Anybody here at the courthouse who'd like to provide public comment on this item? Please stop sharing. Like everything against my teacher voice. Stop sharing. All right. Is there anyone online, Sarah, who'd like to provide public comment? This third project, I'm really it's got my wheels a turning here, and trying to understand sort of what our role as a governing body and in land use and in zone, like this all starts. My question is for Sarah and Sean, like, is there a responsibility that the commission is going to have going forward on any of these projects, or that all went to the Kansas Land Trust? And I mean, will we change zoning on some of the, like if it's in the urban growth area, that just sort of
Think
caught
so.
my
Yeah,
eye.
I'd invite Caitlin, like, I don't
Yeah,
think
Caitlin.
we have obligations in this, there's not obligations on part of the county to run, manage, open up a campground, none
Yeah.
of that. That's
No.
not, it's.
we're simply trying to look at all of the community plans when we're identifying if it is the best project for us to undertake and if a conservation easement is the right protective measure, or if there are other ways that the landowner can work to protect their land. And that's something where we need to be doing more research to understand what that is, but it's not asking anything of you at this time.
So Caitlin, help me think through, like, we do have a responsibility around zoning, and if there is a conservation easement, and I know this urban one may not have that, right? That's why I was trying to figure out which one. That may limit what type of development, which is something we've said we've wanted, but I think it does come back to, did Douglas County dollars go to protect that land down the road? I guess I didn't have in my mind, maybe other commissioners did, that it would be in the urban growth area. That's what's really sort of got my wheels turning here. do you have any thoughts on that? Maybe I'm not being very clear.
I'm not sure I totally understand.
So if we put Douglas County, and these were federal dollars that were signed to Douglas County and then Douglas County, and if we're, by doing that, we are um, subsidizing, I'm not sure that's the right word, movement to zoning for a land permanently, we have to think about how land is used all over the county and what might be the next spot that development would go and the next spot that development go. But if we are putting money towards that type of are we sort of putting a permanent hold on something in the future? Yeah.
Well, a conservation easement does protect the use of the land. And that is part of what we're hoping to do, is protect that use of the land in perpetuity. I will say that an urban farm does seem to align with a lot of the goals that the county has expressed. And I think the open space plan as well. And I think that protecting land is a necessary part of growth and development. I don't know if that's answering your question.
And I feel like Sean might have something to add here, but this is that's a really good question of, this is a pilot of what this looks like. And so if the county wants to continue in this space, perhaps, where this is integrated into some of the work here and putting those that review in place. So how it worked for this program, this pilot, because we did kind of entrust the Kansas Land Trust with the ultimate end decision, because these will be KLT held easements. We did review the applications and provided feedback on them, but ultimately it was up to the Kansas Land Trust Board to choose those projects to take on. But perhaps in the future, if this is a way that we want to continue investing in open space protection, we could include Douglas County more strongly into the process, perhaps being like a co-holder of the easement, or there's different strategies for how the county could be even more involved in that project selection. So all to say that continuing to learn, and again, that's wonderful feedback for how we might something to continue
Something
to
to think
consider in
about.
the future.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm not sure I'm trying to direct us one way or another. It's just got me curious because I guess in my head, when we put the plan together, I wasn't thinking it would happen in that urban growth area. I'm not sure I'm against it. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to process that now. I'm just trying to think about it. I
Well,
don't
but
know if other commissioners have thoughts either.
I would say, but like the Wakarusa River corridor is inside the urban growth area, and that was an area that was identified, pretty directly under the open space plan that we want to look, think, talk more about what's happening in the Wakarusa Valley. So I hear what you're saying, but I also, lots of things are in that area.
I think I'd only add to that part of this is about public access to these lands. So this is, I kind of look at it similar to a park, to the extent that people are going to be able to go to a place that they otherwise would not have access to, in this case, an urban farm, and see how that actually operates. And again, I don't know if that's accurate, Caitlin, to say it that way, or.
Yeah, I think, we definitely looked at the most significant public benefit of all of the applications that we got. And we really do feel that these rise to the top and accomplish a lot of goals of the community at large for protecting local food systems. That's a really great goal for a community to have, and this can help to secure that. So all of them have significant public benefits, and that one is it's a new thing for us too. So that's why, there's a little bit of hesitancy. We just aren't exactly sure how to enter into this, but we definitely think it's a worthy thing to protect.
Commissioner Kelly, I'll share with you, when, years ago now at this point, starting to have these open space conversations and thinking about what our role or place might be in promoting and participating in land conservation efforts, supporting it for landowners. I did think about the urban growth area, just in terms of, I wondered sort of early in the conversation, would we sort of spatially limit it in one way or another, whether it was about our growth zones or whether it was about, certain targeted regions, and we were just going to really narrow it down, or if it would be, countywide available possibility. And so my thinking about that I remember sort of sorting out is that within the urban growth area where, from government's perspectives, we anticipate development of one kind or another, or maybe many kinds in some directions, are going to happen, and we hope that maybe local governments will support some of that growth in a smart and responsible way. To me, this is it's kind of a small one because it's so nuanced and it's only going to affect a few pieces of land, a few parcels ultimately. It's a little bit of a balancing of those scales is how I thought about it. That, to Caitlin from KLT's point, that that conservation and land protection should be a part of any growth and development of a community, and that to have something in place that helps facilitate that for the landowners who aren't ever going to be interested in selling to the highest bidding developer that wants to build whatever XYZ and that has an interest in a totally different direction, that we are able to offer this tool that facilitates that possibility, which is a little bit of balancing out to just unfettered development. So that's helpful. I remember thinking through that when we were initially having these conversations about how to zero in on what sort of our priority or piloting projects were going to be.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And my recollection was thinking it's good that it stays with Kansas Land Trust and doesn't come back here. Like, I think that's a really good thing. I hadn't had in my mind that it might be urban agriculture and that would be the public benefit to foods. The Wakarusa River corridor was what I had in the first two projects are totally aligned with what I had in my mind. And so this has just sort of disrupted my thinking. And rather than just kind of rush by it, I thought we might want to talk about it a little bit. So Commissioner Willie, do you have something?
Yeah, so I'm kind of thinking along those lines also that I think the intention is that as areas develop, these become even more critical to have some lands that are set aside for the other kind of public benefits beyond housing and infrastructure and that sort of thing. And I think what's maybe kind of getting us in a bit of a glitch is not having a location with these. And when we deal with land use, we always have a location, and we have a lot of context that kind of goes in and around those locations. So I guess recognizing that that's not what's going to be shared at this level at this time, I wonder if maybe that Tanya Voigt, our zoning and codes director, has worked with open space from the very beginning. If maybe if we would feel comfortable having her have a lens on that to flag some things that, oh, that actually may or may not work with commission priorities that we've seen that are otherwise. So if we're dealing with it in a vacuum, we say, yes, it's great, but we don't usually deal with land use items in a vacuum. We have all the other context that comes with it, plus the neighbors. So I think that's just why it feels different. And also the other two, which are, kind of in line with what I think we were kind of thinking about on the front end of things. But I know what that benefit is in the near term. So it's a biodiversity and habitat and sort of thing, with the idea that the public access part is maybe a ways out or a long ways out. But in the meantime, we've secured some habitat that might not otherwise get secured. The urban agriculture one, for some reason, feels a little different from that. So it's land that's in production that stays in production. We don't know what the next step looks like or who pays for that programming. So it does feel a little different, and we're just kind of processing that from up here.
And I might add, I guess I could prompt Caitlin on this, but thinking of the funding as a percentage of a pie here, I would venture to bet that, well, maybe I can just hand it to you, of compare cost comparatively, the two potential easement projects, I would bet would be a larger percentage of that pie, where the urban agriculture project is not as time intensive financially.
I mean, we'll see. But yeah, it will require our time and diligence as we identify the appropriate path for protection. So I think that time is really, we'll see what we come up with, but we'll definitely keep you updated. And yeah, I would just want to reiterate, it's new to us as well, urban agriculture. So, but we didn't want that to be a reason that we don't proceed with it. So.
Yeah, I just really want to compliment and appreciate that part. To me, the three sort of differences of these projects that are have been elevated and are being pursued at this point, or at least further researched, like they're pretty diverse and there's different benefits, and I like that factor. But I just want to compliment that it's clear to me that of evaluating all those applications, narrowing it down to eligibility first, and then sort of determining where to elevate from there. It seems like that was a pretty robust process, in particular to be able to pick something that feels new and unusual, and you're not really sure what the pathway is, but there's something worthwhile about exploring it further. So I just appreciate that. I like us thinking outside the box and considering whether it's a fit, and if not, can we help sort of steer in a different direction that helps that landowner still achieve their goals. Like that's part of what I'm really excited about this piece of our open space plan, is that us becoming a place that residents can come to for that information, you know, beyond these sort of flagship projects that may be as a result of these dollars, that it's building this sort of process and repository of where all the information is and how do you access the different pathways and figure out what the right pathway for your idea of conservation is. I just think that part of it is really cool. So I hope that for you know, our staff's perspective and everybody else with KLT and otherwise that are working on this, that it is feeling like a really fruitful process in terms of being able to think about how do we continue to elevate these opportunities and these options and pathways for residents, and make sure that it's known about, so that that people know where to come get the information and determine what's feasible or possible in the future.
Thank you.
Think it's helping us kind of challenge some preconceived notions about what we thought the program could be versus what it could be. And one of the things I think at least I hadn't really thought about was, I think one of my assumptions was we were talking unincorporated land kind of only, but you know, the county covers also 4 cities. Did we get any applications that were within city limits? Or did we consider applications within city limits?
I don't think we did.
I don't think one of the main considerations, especially working with KLT, is the size of the parcel. So that would limit most parcels within city limits, I would venture to say.
Okay, Caitlin, will you have any recommendations for us? I mean, this was done with Caitlin S. Will you have any recommendations for us going forward? This was done with some one-time money, and I'm interested in, like, now that you've seen all the applications, is there more seed money that we need to put towards that? Will you have any kind of recommendation based on the applications that you got?
You know, one thing that was really apparent to me in reviewing the applications is, again, we just do the protection, but a lot of landowners came to us that have needs that should be taken care of before protection. So restoration work, a lot of landowners have this vision, but their land really needs some care and some maintenance. And that's not something that we can support them with. And we also can't protect their land in its current state. It doesn't meet our conservation criteria as it is. So that's something that we saw quite a bit of people that really want to have a prairie restoration or woodland restoration and have public trails, public access, all of the things that meet every single significant public benefit. But it's not ready and we can't support them in that. So we did try to connect to them with resources through the state or otherwise that might be able to guide them in that effort. But that might be an area where the county could support other conservation goals.
I think that was one of the things when we were talking about open space that was a value that was brought forward, is how do we help private landowners meet conservation goals of their own land. And so finding those resources and how do we help publicize that for the ones that didn't necessarily put an application through this program, but getting resources to people for that can really, there's a lot of people who have a heart for it and need the know-how and need some help.
And I also think there's this sort of chicken and egg conversation of, you know, if we invest public dollars in the conservation work and restoration, but then it doesn't go into easement, like how do we maintain, how do we preserve that investment? And I know we've had that conversation with the HCC before and making, you know, investments in privately held resources.
But there are resources for like the federal EQIP program and the state Habitat First program that are, you know, they're public dollars. They're not our dollars, but they have their own set of rules and bureaucracy and things that they're managing with that. But they know how to kind of keep track of the conservation goals that they're wanting to put forward with it. So those are the kind of things that I guess I would think are resources. Are there others that we should be letting people know about?
Well, that's actually, we have a small grant with the HCC from a couple of years ago to create a landowner resource guide that isn't our resources, but the questions we get from landowners, connecting them to those resources. So specific to Douglas County, working with the open space program to make sure that that can get out to landowners who reach out with questions. So that's something we're hoping to develop. We are working to develop. It will be developed soon. But that kind of resource guide is a first step, I think, in connecting people to those other resources. But I agree that, you know, when we're thinking about conserving land that may need restoration work, like those things are the chicken and the egg. And it will be really cool to see where the open space program goes in the future and if there's a way that we can work with those efforts simultaneously, especially when we're thinking about aging landowners who may not have time to do everything in succession. So to be able to have resources where we can work on restoring and conserving the land, I think would be really beneficial.
One kind of thing that I think is exemplified here, this conversation, is just the complexity of these projects. And so that's kind of been my key takeaway in working with the Kansas Land Trust on this, is having the flexibility in the program to support all these diverse needs and these landowners at different life stages. And having the time. This is a really important decision that property owners make for their land, especially if they go down the easement pathway. That's a permanent, essentially a real estate transaction. So there's a lot of complexity and it takes a lot of time and a lot of relationship building. So I think that's kind of my key takeaway of if whatever we are able to do in the future, that it allows for that complexity and time. And I'm really excited about these projects and the pilot program in particular to start building some of those relationships, specifically with landowners, and being able to, as they would like to, share their story of, you know, their experience. There's a lot of connections with neighbors that happens in projects like this. So I'd be hopeful that, you know, start doing small steps here and there and potentially, you know, have that grow into more in the future. But you kind of have to start slow and really build those relationships.
Recognizing the complexity of each project, and every project is unique, but also within the pilot program, I'd love to see us kind of identifying if there are places that can be streamlined for conservation easements and protection, because it's always felt, you know, when I've engaged with folks, including Kansas Land Trust, about it, it's hard to even get your head around as a landowner what needs to happen and when. So like, if there are any ways that we can, as a county, with these open space dollars in this pilot program, kind of help find those places where we can smooth the way.
Yeah, we already, with the beginning of the funding, created a guide for people interested in protecting their land, and that's available on our website. And I think it breaks down some of the complexities of an easement and helps landowners hopefully at least get a good idea of the pathway and know what kinds of questions to ask as they engage in conversations. And it gives them realistic expectations of time and what goes into this decision.
I want to echo something Commissioner Reed said, that thanks to the Kansas Land Trust and to our staff for continuing to keep an open mind about the way we thought about this. Because even as I'm sitting here processing, we've had a lot of requests in this space and in other places where we've met, asking to sort of preserve farmland. And really, that in my mind is up to the landowner. And it's interesting to think about this may be an avenue to do that down the road. You're talking specifically about an urban agriculture project, but I'm just wondering and this doesn't really need a response. I'm sort of interested to see where this conversation continues to go, because I hear that value of this is farmland. We need to keep it. We need it for our local food system. And we are not the owners of that land. It is the individual owner. So if the individual owner wants to keep it that way, there may be a way to do that. So this is really
Absolutely.
interesting.
A lot of the acres that we protect are farmland. So there's absolutely a way for people that own farmland that want to keep it farmland to do that with the Kansas Land Trust or other conservation land trusts. And there are programs that support that as well.
Would I be right in saying mostly, when you're talking about working lands, not just agricultural land, working lands, would those mostly be ranch lands that have kind of that biodiversity and some, working within native grasslands and plant populations? Or are you talking about, when you say farmland, are we talking about commodity agriculture?
Some of all. And so we do have some agricultural land and working lands, but there are programs in the state of Kansas, whether or not we're the right partner for protecting farmland. So yeah, there's a lot of players that can support those landowners if they're interested, even if it doesn't meet our criteria for conservation.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you very much. We'll close that agenda item. That is our full regular agenda. We'll move on now to appointments. Do we have an appointment? No, not tonight.
I don't think we have any.
had any. I always look at Commissioner Anderson because she seems to be making lots of
All the
appointments lately.
appointments these days.
All right, we'll move to Commissioner and Administrator Miscellaneous. I still think we could switch those two around because we always start with Sarah's memo.
Thank you, commissioners. My updated memo is in the packet, added some dates. There's a sheriff's office is holding a corrections academy graduation coming up if commissioners are interested in attending. Next week, we will not have a work session. I will have one commissioner absent and one online. And we will be talking about LDCFM Station 6. That presentation is going to go to the city the day before, and then will come to us that day. I've got a couple other agenda items coming. Then the 24th and 1st, right now I'm planning on work sessions at 4 o'clock. Commissioners, that's all I have.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioners, any miscellaneous items?
I just have one. It's not too impactful, but I've been meaning to share it. And finally today I had a meeting that reminded me. So I think I'd shared months ago after coming back from the NACO legislative conference that I was exploring sort of their different policy steering committees, and in early summer applied to be selected for one of those committees. And then the first meeting of the sort of new year of deciding legislative policy direction from a national county level. That meeting happened today. And so I was selected to be on the Environment, Energy, and Land Use Policy Steering Committee. So TBD, what sort of all the topics we might discuss. It's of course very broad, but today was a pretty interesting intro, if you will, and presentation from they call them Board of Supervisors in other places. So a county supervisor in Loudoun County, Virginia, which is apparently the data center capital of the world. And they provided some pretty interesting sort of experience and intel based on their past decade or so, almost at this point of having speculative development and actual development around data centers. So without going into too many of the details, it was an interesting perspective and overview and a lot of really good basically lessons learned. And so if your county is experiencing these pressures or considering this type of zoning, land use regulation, here are some tips. So I'm going to have some follow-up conversations with zoning and code staff about that. And of course, along the way with each month's meeting, as I learn stuff that I think is relevant, I will continue to stay in touch with staff about that and elevate anything that is of particular interest here. But just wanted to give you all an update that I'm representing our county on those national calls and hope to learn a lot in the next year and maybe maybe we'll have some influence to throw in there too about some things.
Thank you for serving there. I think that'll give us an interesting window into what other communities are facing.
You might have noticed in Sarah's Friday update, Sarah and I will be going down to Wichita later this week to meet with the Big Five, the five largest counties in Kansas. Sarah, if you could attach on Friday's memo, the agenda that they sent out. And if you see that and there's things that you want me to share with that group, and I'll report back when we come. It's a lot of travel for a very short meeting, but I think it'll be beneficial. Some of the issues, motor vehicle tax is clearly on there. That's something we've talked about here, but I think it's good for the five counties to talk as one and see how we might continue more advocacy, especially as I think some issues will come up this year around property tax at the state legislature level. So. But we'll get that agenda to you, and I just wanted to invite commissioners, if you have any thoughts on anything you see on that agenda that you want me to express while we're down there, please don't hesitate. Make sure you say that through Sarah.
And I know it's a long drive, but I place a lot of weight on those meetings. I think they're just getting started and just unfolding, but I appreciate you participating in it, and I think it's going to be fruitful. I know when they were starting to form that, the idea was like these five counties have half the population of the state. Perhaps we should be heard at the state level, and by working together was a way to make that happen that maybe wasn't happening previously. So thanks for continuing in.
I do hope there's also time. I don't, maybe not this one, but another one, to talk about the things that we have in common and the challenges that we have in common as large metropolitan areas in the state of Kansas. And I sometimes think our legislators at the state, and in a recent call with some federal legislators, don't always really understand that we are a very diverse state. And if you focus on just a few land areas and the problems they have, it's very different than others. So these five getting together, I think, can maybe consolidate that voice a little bit.
I would add too, and I'm going to look at you, Jake, to make sure I got this right. My understanding is one of the things that was talked about last year at these events was, the number of state representatives that have experience in local government or have representation. It used to be a very traditional path. You'd serve on city council or county commission or school board, and then you'd run for state house. More and more state representatives have bypassed that step and don't really understand the work that happens at the local level. So I hear that they formed a local government caucus. So folks that have previous experience with local government, and they're going to begin caucusing in Topeka. And I think that's really powerful as a person to sort of it might be a group that will help us mobilize like what works and what doesn't work. We've talked about some of the concerns with statutes around how the R&R statute doesn't match up with the Extension Council statute. Well, it's because all these things are moving parts and local government wasn't necessarily considered. So I think that's a positive step as well.
Okay. Any other miscellaneous items, commissioners?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and mention that Palmyra Township Board met last evening. And we had some residents bring forward some concerns that will probably come before the board. Chad Voigt went ahead and came to the meeting as well to support just kind of level setting with the community residents. We have two roads that we actually have some concerns around. Both roads were having some pretty significant visibility concerns. And so Chad is going to support, as well as Brad, and I'm not sure Brad's last name. Ayers, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And they're going to conduct a traffic study and then provide that analysis back to the township, but then also back to the Board of County Commission, because it will require a resolution to come before the Board of County Commission if we are to make any changes for both of those intersections. So I just want to make the board aware that if that analysis does come before the board, that we'll have to review the analysis and make a decision for both of those intersections. So I just want, all of us to be aware that those concerns are going to come before us at some point in time. to review. And it's really coming before us simply because we did have an incident with a bus and a student driver. So this is just something that we're going to review here probably in the next maybe 6 weeks.
I think I know, but the student driver wasn't driving the bus, right?
No, the
Okay.
student driver was not driving the bus
Yes.
and no one was injured.
Okay.
So
Good to hear. Any other items, commissioners? All right. With that, we are adjourned.